Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tracking Changes with the new administration to help manage contracts and grants, executive orders, taking the fun out of the FAR. I'm PCI's John Plinky, joined today by Bill Walter and Nichole, Atallah, our expert instructors. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. Our primary housekeeping announcement today is just that we have a poll up here asking how much government contract experience do you have. Let us know while I go over the other one. We invite your questions. Please put your questions in the questions panel. In addition to that, there will be a certificate of completion that goes out after the program. Because this program is only a half hour long, it is not eligible for CPE or CLP credits, so there will not be an entry under my certificates and courses. Be aware of that. It will not be there. You will not find it because this class is only good for a certificate of completion. In addition to that, we invite your questions. Please put your questions in the questions panel. Bill and Nichole will answer anything topical. I will take care of anything technical or administrative. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to post our second question asking, where do you work? We had a good mix of career experience levels coming in, but it is
I
going to
don't
be.
think, John, I don't think I've ever seen a poll that was that even. It
It
was,
was super
you had
close.
5 sections and three of them were 20%.
Yeah.
Um, that was kind of unheard of. So it is a pretty equal blend of experience as we go
Yeah.
across.
All right, I'm going to close this one as well. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the polls today. There'll be a final poll at the end asking for feedback. We hope you share feedback honestly. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bill. Take it away, Bill.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nichole, for joining today and me and John for having us. John, your voice did sound a little bit huskier today. I kind of like the cold sound that you had going on there. But we are here today for a brief time to talk about there's a lot of activity going on in the executive branch of the government, and we've had 3 sessions so far where we've kind of talked about executive orders and laws and lawsuits and all sorts of things. So today we're just going to catch up on a couple, as John mentioned. Today's version is called Taking the Fun Out of the FAR. A little bit of pun with PCI's class on Fun with the FAR, or Defun with the DFAR is one of my favorite classes. But today we're going to talk about the status of some of the items. We're going to talk about the GSA consolidation, which is going to be a big impact. And then we're going to talk about the FAR overhaul. So very quickly, executive orders, they've been printing them like they're stamps. They've been coming out quite frequently. We've got about 25, 30 that have been coming out each month so far as of May 8th, last week when we updated the slide. There have been 147 executive orders, and there's some more stuff that came out this weekend, not directly impacting procurement, but it's a very, very active administration. The day the president took office, he signed 26 executive orders, 21 in April, and so far in May, as of the 8th, there have been 5 that have been signed. And I'm sure when I go look it up after today's session, there'll be even more that are sitting out there. They do cover a wide variety of topics. Some of the news over the weekend does deal with tariffs. Some of the others dealt with showerhead definitions and straws, but they cover all sorts of topics. And so today we're going to talk about the ones that directly impact how companies are going to have to contract with the federal government. So Nichole, why don't you talk about EO 14240?
Yeah. So I was looking back, Bill, at the last time we got together to do this, and it was pre March 20th, I think just before March 20th. So we had not talked about this the last time we met. And, to Bill's earlier slide, if anybody's really curious, you can go flip through all these executive orders, and there's a Federal Register page you can go to and flip through them. They're kind of interesting to kind of see the titles. This administration, they've been having a lot of fun with titles of executive orders, but I highly encourage you not to read too much into the title, because you often get in there and it says something a little bit different. So it's always a good idea not to assume. They're very descriptive titles, but it's a good idea to, if you're interested in one of those topics, to open it up. They're not long, they're a couple pages, and you kind of can see where they're going. That is the same as EO 14240, which is eliminating waste and saving taxpayer dollars by consolidating procurement. This is not a new concept, right? We've been, even in the Obama administration, we were talking about consolidation. There have been different names for it over different administrations, but the idea is we need to make buying of common goods and services more efficient. That's what GSA and the schedules are really set up to do. And it's kind of interesting because what you've seen is, I guess when I started 15 years ago, and that's, Bill has probably seen more iterations of this than I am. I'm not saying anything about how many years he's been practicing in this area.
It's okay. Just call me old. That's fine, Council.
But even in my mere 15 years of experience, you saw GSA go from like, this is where we buy pencils and this is where we buy paper, to dipping its toes into more service related work, right? And then at the same time, you saw different agencies that were buying things like their own computer systems and their own common goods and services. And some of these procurements are very large, right? So the idea behind this is, look, these common goods and services should really be under GSA, and we should not have, several huge procurements dealing with buying computers for each agency or subset of agencies. They really should go back together. So agency, within 60 days of this executive order, so March, April, by the end of this month, we're supposed to see agencies come together and submit proposals to the GSA to say, okay, NASA's not going to have its own, I'm just using computers, right? We're not going to have our own computer procurement. This is our proposal to move those procurements over to GSA. I imagine there will be we've already seen this, some short-term disruption in procurements, right? So, we expect this particular procurement to hit the streets, next month, and agencies are saying, wait a second, is that something we're going to have to move to GSA? Maybe we need to do an extension while we're trying to figure that out. So we've started to see that already in the last, month and a half since this hit the streets. And then within the next month, so by the end of June, we should be seeing the GSA administrator come up with their plan. And they're supposed to give that to OMB, right? And they're supposed to change the way they manage procurement, because GSA is going to have the tools to manage these procurements and consolidate these procurements. So there is going to be a period of transition. IT procurement is even more fast-tracked, right? So they want that to happen even faster. And if any of you all have been involved in these big IT procurements, how many iterations of these contracts like CIOSP we've had, right? And how, I feel like the agencies are just getting really close, and now they're going to have to switch. But it's not, I don't think it's all bad news. It doesn't mean everything is going to GSA. It does mean that we're going to see some changes in the way these goods and services are procured, which, I think has everybody's still waiting to see what's in these proposals. What's its impact on small business? What's its impact on, are you going to have tracks? How is it going to work? Can it be done fairly? All of those questions are, we're still kind of waiting to see what will happen, but I do think we can expect some changes. Hopefully we'll get some efficiency out of it, but I think it depends on how they handle the transition.
Yeah, and I agree. And in my more than 15 years of experience, we've seen pendulum swings back and forth. And as you said, back in the day, GSA was the procurer of common goods for the government. So if you needed office supplies, if you needed anything that was out there, basically COTS type items, GSA was the team that was responsible for that. And about the time FAFSA was passed, services became such a big piece. And then all of a sudden, we just see so many agencies setting up their own policies and procedures. So Cheryl asked a question here, whether you and I have an opinion as to whether the SOUP 6 will be canceled or not. I don't know if you have an opinion. I certainly don't have an opinion there. I think it's going to take time for the government to figure this out. During the Section 809 panel discussions, I was on the business systems and compliance side. and we got to meet with NASA to hear what they're doing. And NASA had kind of gone through this restructuring of all their different procurement offices about a decade ago now, to identify these people are going to be really talented and skilled in IT. These people are really going to be talented for services. So they kind of consolidated their groups amongst the different buying offices to really take advantage of bringing better prices, better services, better items to the federal government. And I think that's what the executive order is trying to do here. And whether soup is going to be around in a few years or not, I'm not sure that it will be, but there will be a tool very similar to soup that people are going to be able to buy their IT services, their different things from, and it should be under the current administration through the GSA. I mean, I think that's kind of why they're in business in the first place.
Yeah, and it'll depend on whether NASA feels like it can justify buying off of a schedule, right? So what we've seen is that you kind of have to justify your existence in order to save your procurement or yourself. And so I think, is it going to stay for a period of time? I think it's possible that it'll stay for a period of time while adjustments are made to the GSA's got to be able to handle this. And I think one of the ways that they're planning on handling it is through using some new AI tools. I think we've seen the administration want to focus on that. GSA is losing people just like all agencies are losing people, so they're hoping they can take advantage of efficiencies through technology. This stuff does take time to implement. And what we've seen is we move really fast and then we figure out if we broke something that we need to fix again or put a little Band-Aid on for a period of time so we can get the work we need to get done. But there are certainly going to be shifts over the next couple of years. And as Bill said, I think that unless these agencies like NASA can justify why their computers or their whatever is so specialized that you can't get it through GSA or you can't procure it through GSA, which I think is going to be a really high bar, right? Because GSA, you can get things through GSA that are specialized and customized. You just have to run the goods and services through their procurement system. The other thing that's interesting, I think, is this push to try to get as much, out there commercial and not as customized, right? So this administration is trying to really push, let's buy more things commercially and decrease the cost. Like, why are we buying these customized things? If we can buy it in the commercial market cheaper, we should be doing that. And I think there's, some people say, yes, you don't need a special chair that costs $600 when you can buy one commercially for $200. And other clients are saying this stuff really is customized. The stuff that we're building and doing for DoD or NASA is really, truly customized. Those agencies are going to have to justify that.
Mm-hmm. And that has been a big push for many years. Back with FASA, the concept was the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act back in the 90s was we need to buy more commercial. We're paying, 6-7 times what we should be paying for stuff when there are other elements that are available. And the challenge with all of this, as we're going to talk throughout the rest of today, is there is no perfect one size fits all. If there is something that is so special that it can't go through that normal process, you just got to be able to justify it. And otherwise, guys, we got to kind of get all the fish. I just watched Finding Nemo over the weekend. Got to get all the fish pushing down in the net to really try to figure out how do we take care of the efficiencies? How do we identify those that are common goods from those that are not common goods and try to make fewer exceptions to the rules? I think that's one of the key things that the administration is trying to do with this particular executive order.
And, we've been telling clients, like, don't wait until you know what's happening with the procurement or with the work that you're doing now. If you think it's special and shouldn't go on GSA, then you should be helping your contracting office justify, right? Help give them tools, because otherwise they have a lot on their plates and there's been a lot of folks leaving, so they don't often have time to deal with it. So help them. So, all right, acquisition reform. This is a big one. right? We put 3 executive orders on here that are all positioned to change the way that we do acquisitions in this country. And the first one is really focused on EO 14265 is really focused on defense acquisitions and innovation in the defense industrial base. They're doing the same thing as kind of we'll talk about the FAR next, but this one really focuses on DoD and kind of doing an overhaul of the DFARS, right? Like looking at that contracting process, looking how are we going to expedite procurement? How are we going to make it faster? The interesting thing about this, I think, is the focus on what we call OTAs or other transactional authority. And my partner, Cy Alba, has we have a whole series on, OTAs. So if you're really interested in some additional reading on OTAs, he's been doing this series on his blog about OTAs and the way we think it might be used. But we certainly expect that this use of other transactional authority or which historically had some limited tracks of use, right? Things that you could use it for, things you couldn't use it for. It certainly seems like this administration is posed to try to utilize OTAs more, which means it's a really great way for commercial companies that didn't want to deal with the FAR to get into the space because you don't have a lot of the same DFARS and FAR rules and regulations attached to OTAs. It's also concerning to some people for that reason, because, if we expand the use of OTAs, can we continue to keep integrity in the procurement system? So I think there's a balancing act. But, they're reviewing all of their defense programs and all of their procurement related to defense programs right now at DoD. And I think they're well underway in starting that process, at least. EO 14271 is really about cost-effective solutions in federal contracts. They're trying to streamline the federal acquisition process. That really goes in tandem with EO 14275, which was issued the same day on April 15th. And that's restoring common sense to federal procurement. And that's really about reforming the federal acquisition regulation, which we will talk more about on the next slide, because that has already begun, right, Bill?
Absolutely. In fact, why don't we jump into that with the 12 minutes we have left?
All right, let's do it.
All right.
Yeah. Go to the next slide.
I think I did.
There's just a little delay on my side, but we're good. I'm with you.
Okay.
So they're calling this the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul. That's not a name I made up. It's called the RFO Initiative. And I think there was talk of this, and Section 889 was really about those proposals, right, Bill? I think you were deeply involved in that process.
Yep.
This is another shot at that, right, Bill?
Yes. So, one of the key issues of this is when we take a look at the federal acquisition regulation, it's over 2,000 pages of stuff. That's what the executive order identifies. And over the past, when I started my career, the FAR had just come into existence. So that was back in 1983. So to help you guys do the math, I've been doing this for 4 decades now. And I had to learn the old regulations, the FPR and the NASPERS, et cetera, and the DAR, of course. And then all of a sudden we had to learn the FAR. And the FAR keeps getting thicker and thicker each year. As problems arise, as somebody did something wrong, as somebody found a loophole, they patched it like bad software. They just kept putting patches into it over the decades. And now what we have is a patchwork framework. But I think we have to be careful, because while we're doing this revolutionary FAR overhaul, Nichole alluded to OTAs. People were using OTAs to get away from the FAR. Well, in the guiding principles, FAR Part 1 has been updated with a proposed rule. It's really trying to say we need training of contracting officers. They have a lot of flexibilities in the procurement guidebook called the FAR. They have a lot of different things they can do. And there is no, this is me speaking now, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to every procurement. If I'm going to go out and buy a Dell computer or a laptop computer, or if I'm going to be buying an aircraft carrier, I'm going to have a whole host of different elements and risks and things like that. They're going to be built into that. So one of the problems that we do have is people don't take an opportunity to read through the rules that do apply to their programs. We have the bigs, the prime contractors, who are flowing all sorts of requirements down to small businesses that shouldn't be worrying about some of these things if they're providing commercial items. So it is something that I think clearly needs to be looked at. I don't think it's going to be thrown out with the bathwater. I think they are trying to work through it. And Mary has asked very appropriately. She asked this question at the very beginning. She said that she read that FAR changes are going to be coming to the contracting community as deviations.
Yes,
And
we should talk about that. Yeah.
So do you want to hit on deviations quickly there, Nichole?
Yeah, so let's talk about kind of how we anticipate or how so far we believe this is going to be done. So whenever an agency wants you to kind of take a detour or do something different, either because an executive order was issued and we're not going to follow this FAR clause anymore because the FAR clause that we had was really related to the executive order that was pulled by an administration, an agency can issue a deviation, which says, I want you to use this rule for a little while and don't use what's in your contract, right? Don't use that old FAR clause. Use this deviation. And the interesting thing about deviations is that it's not like it's published. I mean, some things are published in the FAR and then you follow them, but most of the time this stuff is updated by the agencies and flowed down to you through contract modifications. So a lot of you are going to see contract modifications that say, okay, now deviate, or there might be a published deviation. So I think my practical advice to contractors is really follow this page, right? You can Google this, follow it, talk to your counsel about it, right? So that you understand which rules you're supposed to be following to the letter of the FAR and which you're supposed to use common sense about, right? And then eventually, because everybody understands that updating the entire federal acquisition regulation is going to take some time. So it's not like tomorrow we're going to have an updated FAR, right? They're moving. They've done their guidance on part 1 and part 34. There is another one listed on the website, but there's nothing underneath it right now. So the only thing we really have substance on is part 1 and part 34, which we've kind of listed here. They're boiling it down to what's statutorily required, right? So that's their kind of guidepost is what is the statute specific, when a statute specifically says you FAR counsel should now take this and turn it into a FAR clause. That's when it's statutorily required to be in the FAR. We have a lot of statutes and regulations that don't specifically say this has to be in the FAR or this has to be in the DFARs, but the FAR counsel or the procuring agencies have found it helpful to have these like guideposts in the FAR, right? That common sense stuff or the stuff that's attached not to statutes but to other things. This administration is saying, no. What we're going to do is we're going to slowly strip the FAR down to what's statutorily required. In the interim, while we're figuring all this stuff out, we are going to issue FAR deviations so that everybody knows, okay, now with FAR Part 1 and FAR Part 34, we're going to be, you should be looking at our deviation language and not everything else. And then eventually we're going to have these buying guides, right? And these buying guides are going to have the other stuff that's not statutorily required. It's supposed to be more common sense. It's supposed to be in plain language so you can understand it, right? And that's supposed to have kind of the other stuff. And then we're going to be relying, as Bill alluded to, on our contracting officers to be more involved, to not just lean so heavily on the FAR, but to actually what I would consider kind of the old school contracting officers that were really having to pick and pull this stuff out. I think there's a sense that we've lost some of that like warrant that they're trained to do. And so we're going to be relying on them to make some of those judgment calls going forward. So I expect to see more of these roll out at a fairly decent clip.
I would agree with that. I've talked with people who are involved in the process. Everybody's very tight-lipped about it, but there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes right now. The first things that we've seen pop out are Part 31 and Part 34, and a few FAR clauses that are associated with Part 34. But Devin, Dave, Maria, a lot of you have asked, okay, where are these deviations located? And they're on the acquisition.gov website with the revolutionary FAR overhaul. So if you go into your browser and you type FAR revolutionary FAR overhaul, it should take you to the acquisition.gov website. And on there at the top, it says, here's the FAR parts that we're changing. And then there's another selection down at the bottom that talks about deviations. So, and deviations aren't new. It's not something that's coming in so people can get around. Deviations have been in place forever. There's currently dozens of deviations in the DFARs, dozens of deviations in the FAR, and sometimes it's something as simple as a threshold. So they passed the law to increase the TINA threshold to $2 million, but the law and the FAR still said 750,000. So this was such an important thing that they said, hey, we're going to issue a deviation to bring that threshold in earlier while they're working on getting the law updated. So a lot of times the deviations are going to be hitting thresholds. They may be eliminating certain requirements. That's one of the big things that the administration is looking at is, are there excessive requirements? Also, one of you, David, had asked a question. He says, hey, is there going to be anything about flow downs to subcontractors? Do we see any signs of, potentially flowing all this stuff down to subs? And I think that, Nichole, you mentioned that they should start to expect to see some of these coming down in modifications to their purchase orders.
Right. And so it'll be interesting because there are some things that are required flow downs to subs that are not actually necessarily required by the statute to be flowed down. So that's going to be the interesting part of, normally a lot of times primes will get the modification from the contracting office and then just automatically modify the subcontract to look in line with it. Primes have this job of saying, okay, are there things that are coming out? Right? Are there things that don't have to be flowed down? And making sure that those mods that go to your subs correctly interpret the deviation is going to be really important. What does that need to say? Is there stuff that comes out of your FAR flow down? And then they have to take the extra step of saying, okay, well, maybe the FAR is taking it out, but is that something I still want as a prime? Because remember, subcontracts are just regular contracts. You can negotiate what you want with your sub, right? So subject, of course, to the requirements of the prime contract. So I think there is going to have to be some independent thought. There's going to have to be some revisions to your subcontracts. We have to be smarter and look more closely at the modifications to figure out what we need to de-scope from a subcontract and what we want to keep in there. And some of it is going to be a prime contractor and a subcontractor negotiating some things that they didn't have to negotiate in the past.
Right. And I think you're going to have to pay attention to the website, pay attention to your advisors, listen to what they say. PilieroMazza has a great blog that they put out with all the updates and what's happening in there. So working with whoever your advisors are to try to stay on top of these things. But don't be bullied by a prime. If a prime says that you got to do something, take a look at what it is. And, part of the whole common sense initiative is, how do we get rid of things that are taking longer and not adding value to the process? So if you're getting stuff flowing down and if it doesn't make sense to you, push back.
Yep, absolutely. We go over all the questions. We're at 30 after, I think, almost.
Yeah. We have one last question. What do you think is going to happen with the comment period? All this stuff is moving quickly. Usually there's a 30-day comment period built into the FAR. What do you think is going to be happening along those lines, Nichole?
So I think the comment period has kind of moved into these roundtable discussions. I was talking to the SBA last week at a legislative fly-in, and apparently a lot of agencies and FAR Council are having these roundtable initiatives to get feedback in real time. I think the process, in order to keep it moving, will not be as formal of a comment period. They're going to go through some of that, but I think the cake's going to be baked in large part before a lot of these, formal rulemaking processes happen. So if you want to say something about what you think should stay and what you think should go, you should be getting involved now. Call your contracting offices. We're trying to put out information as quickly as we can, but there's a lot of activity that's happening outside of those processes that you should be in tune to now in order to have hopefully some real impact on what stays and what goes.
Okay.
I think there's a hotline as well, right, Bill? There's a hotline that you can, I can't remember exactly what it is, but you could do FAR overhaul hotline. And that's a place where you can say, this is really annoying to me, and this is why I don't need it.
Yep, absolutely. They're looking for feedback right on the bottom of the website to say, tell me what your thoughts are. So clearly do that. Okay, our time is up. Stephen, we'll get you the name of that blog. And there are a couple of other questions here. We'll try to reach out to you guys, but a lot of the same flavor, lots of change happening. What do we need to do? My recommendation is stay calm and cool on the surface, but paddle like hell underneath. Stay up to date with the changes that are coming in. Do look at the posts. Do take a look at the acquisition.gov website, and just make sure you're staying up with the game. And that'll be wonderful for you and your firm. Nichole?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Please answer the feedback poll, and we hope to see you all again soon.